Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, because we are well into our 36th season, I talk to authors about their craft, what they're working on, what they've accomplished in the past, what they're planning for the future. It's a slightly wider net than that, however. We have had on sculptors, we've had on painters, we've had on actors. If you have an idea for a writer or other brand of artist who might be a good fit for the Writer's Block, watch for our address at the end of the show. We'd be delighted to get your suggestions. I also want to remind you that the Writer's Block and all the other original programming that comes out of 1623 Studios is a result of cable access television. It's a wonderful community asset, and you do not get this by other systems of getting access to the internet. So you stick with cable, stick with the Writer's Block. I'm very happy tonight to say that I'm welcoming back a writer, a former Coast Guard captain by the name of Russell Webster, who was here previously talking about his book, very pertinent to Gloucester, titled The Sinking of the Gloucester's Patriot. And I believe that Patriot went down in 2009. It's a wonderful book. It's still available. He has also written other books, among them Lost in Charleston Waves, and he is full of energy. He is projecting a new book titled New England Coast Guard Cutters, Stories Behind the Names. Welcome back.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
Russ Webster. You had a distinguished 26-year career in the Coast Guard, and then went on, staying in public service, worked for the Travel Safety Administration.
Transportation.
Transportation. Excuse me. Thank you for the correction. And with FEMA in the New England Section 1. Section's not the proper term.
Region 1.
Region 1. And now you are a full-time historian and author.
I am. Coast Guard writer, yes.
Yes, Coast Guard writer. This is a wonderful book.
Thank you.
And we're going to be showing the cover through different times through the half hour. The title is New England's Lifesaver, Coast Guard legend Master Chief Jack Downey, whom you know and admired clearly, and who passed away just 3 years ago, in 2022. Tell us about the inception of this book. When did you decide you wanted to memorialize Jack Downey?
Probably before he passed, several years. My wife Teresa and I, and the co-author of this book, Mike Ciccolesi.
Excuse me, I apologize to Mike. I forgot to mention this. They're the dual authors, Captain Michael Ciccolesi. Thank you for doing that.
All of us had encouraged Jack to chronicle his 42-year storied career that, started before we put men on the moon and ended well after 9/11. And he began his own biography. It was an autobiography. And it turns out that he never quite made it. But he was one of these people that when we decided to do it after we had talked to the family, they said, well, he's put away this great wealth of information, and coming from a fishing community, he had at least 10 plastic boxes that normally fish go in that were piled high in his storage area. So there was no shortage of research material, but we decided, Mike and I decided, because we knew him for a total of 64 years together, and were so enamored with his personality and all of the things that he had done, not only for us as leaders and eventually friends, but for the legion of people that were positively influenced by him over that career. There were literally hundreds of people that showed up at his 2008 retirement in Point Judah. And it was unprecedented because typically that number of people don't show up except for admirals and other much higher ranking people. So we knew we had to do it for both him and the family.
Maybe you could define for our audience his rank. He was a Master Chief, and that's the elite, upper echelon of NCO.
There's only one
NCO authority.
He was an E9 Master Chief Petty Officer Bosun's Mate, and there's only one higher enlisted person, one, in the entire Coast Guard, and that is the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, an E10, who advises the Commandant of the Coast Guard. So he was in this rarefied air of leadership and rank. And one of the other things that distinguish him from some others at that high level is when he was assigned to a new unit that he didn't know about, he learned, went to school, and performed every function of every operational function at that unit. And a good example is when he went to a surf station in Chatham, and he ended up going to the National Motor Lifeboat School in Oregon and becoming surf qualified. He was surfman number 206. His executive petty officer at the time says, "Master Chief, you don't really have to do that." And he says, "I wouldn't know how to lead these people otherwise."
And I'm sure that's a wonderful way to get the respect of your new team.
Yeah, it was a wonderful and also a painful way for the people that he worked for. If you read Senior Chief McClay, who's one of his acolytes' testimonial in the book, McClay talks about, and Lucy, Senior Chief Lucy, who's now the Nantucket Harbor Master, talks about how a qualification with him could involve days at sea on the boat and tens of hours of questioning before, during, and after.
I think I might have the Lucy description of training marked in here because it's very, it's illustrative. Yeah, Sheila Lucy. In fact, I was going to ask you maybe to read that first paragraph about her experience, which she winds up saying is very, very valuable, but very, very painful.
Exactly.
in the process.
That was his style.
One of the techniques you use in this very well-written book is to begin at the end. You begin with his funeral in 2022. Walk us through his career from the beginning and how we got to the funeral.
Well, I know you only have about 25 more minutes, so I'll give you the abridged version. But it started in 1966, a storied 42-year career. He started out, went to the training center, was briefly assigned to Air Station Salem, where the Coast Guard used to have seaplanes that launch from Salem. He was striking, which is a position that is aspiring to a particular rating, in his case, bosun's mate. And he was the one that was in a boat just off the ramp, keeping people away from the path of the Coast Guard seaplane, and also there in case the plane crashed. From there, he went to a series of Coast Guard cutters, and those are ships 65 feet or greater, including the largest being a 378-foot Hamilton-class cutter, where he was eventually the chief of the boat. The chief of the boat, or the cob, is the senior enlisted person.
I like that expression, COB, chief of the boat.
The cob. Most services have cobs in different roles, and similar roles, I mean. But he was most notably demoted from senior chief to take control of a broken station. He was asked by a field commander that had my position many years before me to come from the reserves at Station Point Judith and take over the command. But the hitch was he had to take a bust. And he was, we believe, the first reservist to be brought to active duty for full active duty responsibilities. And that's where he became known as a kind of a disciplinarian and basically shut the station down, kept people there until things began to happen the way
and
that...
Your description is very, very clear that the place had been run down morally and physically, but he turned it around. And I want to go back just a minute. He was in the reserves.
He was.
And tell us about his civilian life at the time. He's got a new family. What's he doing?
Yeah, he and Judith were high school sweethearts, and his time in high school was just as storied as his time in service. When all the other guys were running around in hot rod cars trying to impress girls, he rode his friend's horse to school and made quite a splash with that. But anyways, back to your question.
Well, he's plumbing. After his father was a plumber,
yes,
and he took after his dad, and he's a reservist, earning money as a plumber, a little money as a reservist, but not a whole lot. And then he's yanked out of that into the full bloom career that you describe.
Yeah, and that became a pattern. You know, he had gotten tired of being a plumber, even though it was a lifelong income stream. And I think the salt water in his veins got to him to the point where when this opportunity came around and he saw that he was good at it, that he stayed with it. And that's why that for 28 of his 42 years, he was a chief petty officer or above. And he also had 13 commands, all of them on smaller cutters or coastal stations, 7 of them permanent and 6 temporary. And that's where he got the moniker Chief Fix-It. Because he would go to places, starting out with Point Judith, later Chatham. I sent him to a Loran station on Nantucket. He didn't know anything about long-range aids to navigation stations, but he knew how to lead. I sent him to the nearby 87-foot cutter Hammerhead out in Woods Hole when that officer in charge fell down a ladder and broke his leg. He went on there. He'd driven boats with wheels on them for years, and this thing had a little joystick like a computer game. But just like the surfman stuff at Chatham, where he went to school and he listened and learned from younger people as well as older people, he figured it out.
You mentioned a couple times his long career, the 40, how many years? 40, how many years was he?
42.
42. At times he sounds like a most traditional kind of novel character, kind of salty, and maybe from the age of wooden ships. Is that accurate? Is that an accurate description of him?
Well, he definitely was salty when he had his favorite drink, CC on the rocks. But he was also, according to the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard at that time, who did the foreword, Skip Bowen, a Renaissance man who could operate in the 60s and parts of 5 different decades. So he was somebody that could be self-transformational in developing his leadership style. There were people that approached me personally and said, "You should not write this book." And I said, "Why?"
Really?
Because there were some things that they alleged he did that were harsh by today's standards. And I said, they would tell me things and I would say, "Can I quote you on that? Is there a record of it?" And they say, "No, but we just don't want you to publish the book. And I said, that's not how it works. He was a guy that pushed envelopes. He pushed people. He was, when it came to learning lessons and leading people based on bad things that had happened,
Yeah.
he was a dog with a bone. He was a guy that would take those lessons and integrate them everywhere he went from that moment on.
Some of his exploits, and I want to get to the life-saving, some of his exploits reminded me of it's almost a trope I've seen in movies, and I've heard this personally related to me, where a high-ranking NCO will come in and be surrounded by officers, and they're all trying to look like officers, but they're all waiting for him to tell them what to do because they don't have the experience. You know, there might be a new lieutenant who's been a lieutenant for 6 months, and he's looking for was he in situations like that?
Yeah, and I experienced that special knowledge on a personal basis from Master Chief Downey, and I told him afterwards I really appreciated it. So I was a new field commander at Group Woodsole, which was from Duxbury around to the Connecticut border, out 200 miles. And of course, his operating area was within that. I saw him when he was at Chatham, and we had a boat up on the ways. And I had just come from another field command where I was the deputy. It was in Maine. And I looked at the propellers on this 44-foot boat, which was the successor from the 36-foot boat that was used in the famous Chatham rescue that's in Finest Hours. And I said, Master Chief, it looks like that boat has run aground in Chatham.
Uh-huh.
And he looks at me, and I said, Master Chief, so where are the grounding reports for that? And he looked at me, and it was our very first encounter, and he said, Captain, says, if we had to file a grounding report every time this boat ran aground here in Chatham, we would never get underway. And then he explained to me that it was the Chatham bar, it was sand, and every time the boat went in the sand necessarily, the propellers got sandblasted, and then it looked, pristine and shiny like they did. And of course, my experience up to that point had been boats running aground in Maine and New Hampshire, where if you make that kind of mistake there, you're going to do a grounding report.
One of the important words in the title, New England's Lifesaver, and you mentioned in the book that he saved over 700 lives. And one of the really exciting, excellent peaks in this book repeatedly is your description, which is really dynamic and fluid. I enjoyed them, of a rescue or a near rescue. And I wonder if you could read one or two of those. The first one we mentioned before, before the half hour started, is
the general.
Yes. The general on page 115.
So I'll read from the book. It's the first official record of Downing being acknowledged for proficiency in search and rescue came via an official letter from the Chief of Search and Rescue at the Coast Guard District in Boston in 1970 from the Chief of Search and Rescue. And I write that letters like this were unusual, especially from his boss's boss's boss. During what started as a routine April 21st underway training mission in a Station Point Judith 40-foot motor lifeboat, Downey, just 2 years into a 14-year reserve assignment that would see him rise through the ranks from seaman, E3, to senior chief boatswain's mate, E8, was at the time a second class, E5, underway as the rescue boat coxswain, or the person who drives the boat. He received a relayed call for help from the fishing vessel General. At 10:35 a.m., Downey and his crew were 6 miles south of Weekapaug Inlet, Rhode Island, when the report came in of a mariner with severe abdominal pain. The training mission had quickly transitioned to a real-life search and rescue case. Immediately vectoring the 40-foot rescue craft towards the General, Downey quickly began to talk the master of the fishing vessel through several medical instructions. By 11:15 a.m., the distressed mariner had been safely transferred from the General in 5-foot seas. Within minutes, the victim went into cardiac arrest and required life-saving CPR as Downey drove the boat to the Galilee Pier, where an ambulance awaited the mariner. 6 months later, Downey received a personal letter of congratulations from Captain William Ellis, the Chief of Search and Rescue for the 1st Coast Guard District in Boston, which read in part, "Your alertness, quick thinking, and quick actions in saving this man's life is commended. I extend to you my congratulations. Well done." So what's unusual about this for me, and why we wrote about this, is certainly it's 4 years after he's gone to boot camp, just 4 years, and now he's a reservist. And he's, I don't want to say just, but he's a lower mid-tier enlisted person who has the presence of mind to not only operate the boat, shift emphasis from a training mission, immediately know what questions to ask a boat with someone who's in distress for their life, get there, direct the rest of the crew into life-saving actions of the man. And what is also impressive is at the time, I believe it was rare to be acknowledged for what many people saw as something regular or routine. So I knew that if this captain took the time to write this letter, it truly was an extraordinary thing for him to have done and be recognized.
I like the I like that the second or third line in the paragraph, the first paragraph, especially from his boss's boss's boss. That's up, 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 up. And usually the people that far below or that far above are invisible to each other.
Exactly.
But so that's quite a tribute. You mentioned a couple other of these rescues. Is there another one you could share with us?
Yeah, I think I certainly could talk briefly about the John F. Kennedy Jr. air crash in 1999. There was, at the beginning of Saturday morning, July 17th, the Coast Guard had just been made aware at like 2:15 in the morning that his plane might be overdue. And he and the canal station, Cape Cod Canal Station, were among the first stations to kind of self-deploy. They heard what the Coast Guard group, which is the parent group for all of the stations, they heard the chatter on it. And he had put his boat crews out there because at the moment, because John F. Kennedy Jr. was flying visual flight rules, there was no awareness of where on his 100-mile transit from New Jersey to Martha's Vineyard that he might be. But Master Chief Downey, Jack, put his crews out there, and so did the other people before a formal case was established. And a good friend of mine, Jim McPherson, basically stopped by his station because they had a relationship as well. And the Master Chief at that time, very early in the day, before there was much information at all, Jack told the commander at the time, says, "He's not out here." He says, "You need to go to the approaches of Martha's Vineyard Airport and you'll find him there." So, this is before, I think it was nearly coincident from a radar point from the FAA, and it was before all of the flotsam and jetsam had bubbled up from the aircraft that was later used by the NOAA to go backwards in terms of currents, tides, and winds to suggest where the plane might be. So in my view, that's one of the small micro awarenesses that he had about where we should look initially, long before all of the other data came in.
Chief Fix-It.
Chief Fix-It.
The weather conditions were appalling, I think, at that time, weren't they? dense fog?
It was extreme haze, and the night of July 16th, when JFK Jr. was flying, was there was a meteorological condition that was extreme haze, and he unfortunately had mistuned his weather channel on his airplane to the wrong frequency, so he did not get that information.
There's always something that could have saved you that everybody finds out later. I want to look at another couple of markers I had. You already mentioned that COB. COB is the chief of boat. I love that expression. Not an expression, it's a title. And I have underlined here, the ship was 370 feet long with sleek lines, 42-foot beam, and 2 diesel and 2 gas turbine engines. That's a ship. That's a hell of a ship.
I was stationed on 2 of those, and they could go so fast on those JP4 jet engines that they would kick up a 12-foot high rooster tail behind them. And one of the things I'm sure Master Chief, who was a qualified OD, and I had to worry about is if we were going by sailboats and we were going very fast, even for good reasons, you had to worry about those rooster tails projecting towards much smaller boats and becoming injurious.
That 12 feet high, that's kind of like the shows you see. When,
you could stand on the flight deck looking back, and the rooster tails would be just even with the flight deck, which was up one whole deck from the fantail to stern area.
Now we've touched on this already. Oh, geez, we're out of time. I'm sorry to be so abrupt, but I hadn't looked at the clock in quite a while, and I find that the half hour went like that. I very, very much enjoyed it.
Same here.
Captain Russell Webster, retired, United States Coast Guard. Thank you for being with us and sharing New England's lifesaver, Coast Guard legend, Master Chief Jack Downey.
My
and
pleasure.
we look forward to the next book, New England Coast Guard Cutters, Stories Behind the Names.
Thank you for having me.
I want to thank you in television land, cable land, for being with us. If you've learned something about life-saving and the kind of life-saving that Jack Downey did that Russ Webster was so careful to analyze and write about, then the writer's block has done its job. Thanks for being with us, and I hope to see you again next time on the writer's block. Good night.